This is Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast prepared by the team at Paper Trails. Owning and running a small business is hard. Each week, we'll dive into the challenges, headaches, trends, fun, and excitement of running a small business. After all, small businesses are the heartbeat of America, and our team is here to keep them beating. Hello, welcome to Small Business Big World. Another week here. Today we're talking with Nick Wright. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
Nick is a now former small business owner, which is exciting. So today we're going to talk about how to sell your business and what that kind of process looks like.
It's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah. So just a little housekeeping before we get going. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe everywhere that you follow podcasts. So we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that fun stuff at Small Business Big World. You can always email us if you have questions for us or any of our guests. Feel free to email us at podcast@papertrails.com. And lastly, don't forget to join our Small Business Big World Facebook community where you can ask questions and have conversations. So Nick, you've been retired now for how long?
Retired unofficially since September of 2023. So what's that, about 5 months?
All
6
right,
months?
so you're doing all right there. So tell us a little bit about the business you're in and how and when you decided to get out and to retire.
Yeah, so I used to own the business that we're talking about today, Sharper Events and Tents, right here in Kennebunk, Maine. I started it right around August 2015 with my 3 little girls at the time. They're much bigger now. And I always told them that the goal was to create a business that would be sellable or retirable. Contrary to what we just said, I am not retired.
Still a young guy. You're plenty left in the tank.
I'm 45. There's probably double that time left in me to do work. But I really, to be honest with you, Chris, I wasn't 100% in love with the business anymore.
Okay.
And that was probably the biggest instigator to get me to start looking the other direction. However, the big C word, COVID, definitely did a number on me with the business.
Sure. As it did with most people, right?
Yeah, that's
I think that, we saw from our perspective, a lot of our clients made those decisions to retire or sell their businesses during COVID just because it got too much, right? Staffing became too crazy. Business prices became crazy. The way things had to happen was 10 times more work. It killed people. So it's interesting to see that was a big catalyst for you too.
It really was. And to be honest with you, the effect that it had on us with labor force, and having to get creative with our event rentals, it kind of showed me both sides and really made me get back to kind of the humble beginnings and say, well, what am I really doing here? Why do I really want to do it anymore? With that being said, as we came out of 2022, we had made some changes, coincidentally, going into 2020 with our actual delivery process and the way we set up our rentals. And that significantly decreased our overhead cost. And that really was a coincidence because COVID started right after we started to make those changes. Thank God we did make those changes because we probably would have been done, not by our own doing. Once I got in, kind of pulled out of that and kind of got back on the right track and really got a good crew under my belt, I started to realize that I just wasn't loving the business anymore. And once that started happening, I started exploring different options of actually selling the business, what the values were and whatnot.
So it's an interesting thing. You talk about just not loving the business. You kind of got burnt out, right?
That's correct.
And I think everyone sells their businesses for different reasons. Some of them are truly aged out, ready to retire. Some folks just aren't interested anymore. There's challenges. You have other interests, right? There's lots of different opportunities out there for people to transition. And certainly we see a lot of folks that just get stuck in it. They don't see a way out. So I'm glad that you saw, you could find a way out. Once you're ready, how did you start that process? Did you throw it on Facebook, say, hey, I got a business, I'm ready to sell? Or did you hire someone? Where'd you go? How did you manage through that process?
So we initially hired a sales broker to kind of look at the business, try to help us put a value on it, figure out what the evaluation was. How do you really price a business that's not really breaking the $1 million mark a year yet? Remember, our season's only about 4.5 months. So here in Southern Maine with event rentals. Now, certainly we could have stretched that in either direction, but the price of the business really came down to the quality of the equipment, the age of the equipment, how old the trucks were.
Right, those are your assets, business assets, right?
That's right. And so while there was a little bit of goodwill in there, it really, with that type of business, a lot of times what happens in the event rental industry is the companies end up going to auction. Pennies on the dollar type thing.
Sure.
But I knew because of the demand and our growth and how we were just excelling at everything we did, our numbers kept increasing year over year, that it was probably best to try to find a suitable new owner.
Sure.
So as we started looking at developing pricing, I started kicking tires around town. In fact, I think I even contacted you.
Yeah, you did.
To try to sell you the business. And at the time, I think you were getting into the dog business or something.
That was, yes, that was a short-lived venture as well.
So as we did that, we did find ironically, we found a very good potential buyer who ended up being a customer of ours.
Oh, great.
And it turns out he was just retiring from Major League Baseball. And him and his wife had relocated back to Kennebunk, and they always wanted to have their own small business.
That's awesome.
As we started working with them through this process, it just started dragging on.
Let's say, how long did the process take? You were trying to move this for a while, right?
Yeah. So 2022, at the beginning of that year, is really when I started buckling down and putting together a package of what the sale in the company looked like, and reaching out to different people that I knew in the area who might be a good fit, who had the finances to actually purchase an event rental company, who had the physical ability to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was probably right at the beginning of 2022. Now, here's one of the mistakes I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. It is imperative, regardless of whether you've been through this process or not. This is one of the lessons I learned. Not to tell the public that you're selling your business.
Sure. That's a roll of the dice, of course, right? I mean, you see.
It really is.
Right.
And in my situation, I knew that there was a good possibility that a former customer would probably be the buyer.
Yeah.
Because they see the product, they see the joy that we bring families, weddings, different events, and they most likely understand it and get it because they've been through the rental process. The risk that you take, that you mentioned, is really that if that sale doesn't go through, you then have people asking, well, are you open? Are you not? I thought you sold it. I didn't think
people
you did.
Get confused real quick, right?
They really do. And luckily that all panned out to work in our benefit. But there was a few times where I actually lost a few events the following year because the deal didn't go through right away. Right.
People thought that it wasn't going to happen. They didn't want to get stuck with, especially in your business. It's a planning business.
That's right. And most of your bigger events are booked a year out. Right. So we lost one of our biggest events for 1 year. Luckily, we got it back for this coming year for the new owners. So once that went through about a year and a half, and the process just started to drag on. Paperwork wasn't getting signed. Certain documents weren't being turned over through no fault of the potential buyer. It's just kind of how it worked out. Now, in this business, when you get to January, you got to be ready to go for May. Yeah. And you got to be booking these events. Now, I knew that I didn't want to be doing this business, but I'm also looking at $750,000 of inventory in a warehouse. And having landlord issues where we were up in Biddeford, I pulled out of the first round of the sale because I knew it just wasn't looking like it was going to come to fruition. So I had to decide, okay, I'm going to give this one more year. And then if I go through the year, I'm going to end up having to go to auction, right? If I get through this year physically, mentally, emotionally, it was time to sell at the end of that. So we went through, and what we ended up doing is we found the new warehouse that Dave Harrison built over behind the Walmart in Sanford, and beautiful facility. And I went over there in the middle of January. I said, Dave, I need a place. And I said, this is unbelievably exactly what I've been looking for 9 years. Chris, I never had an office at my warehouse until my last year.
That's awesome.
So I was driving from Smart Home all the way to Biddeford.
Right. Back and forth all day.
All day long.
Time and energy.
So half of my day was spent driving back and forth. And I did that for a long time, 8 years. Yeah. So we moved it over to Harrison's, and couldn't have been a better setup. And really what it did was it took a lot of the pressure off me. Not to mention, give me a shout out to my guys. I've been extremely blessed with the crew that I've had over the years. All of them have been local high school and college kids, and they've just been a constant feeder. They always bring their buddies. This last year, these guys stepped up to the plate. They knew I didn't want to be there. They wanted to make a lot of money for college, for those Friday nights. And so all those things came together. While I was doing that, what naturally had progressed is the buyer, who we had pulled out of, came back into the fold and had actually been doing work on his own to get experience for the banks. So he went and managed UPS crews.
Oh, wow.
So that he could get some experience. I mean, this guy was a Major League Baseball pitcher for 11 years.
Okay.
So by doing that, he came back into the fold. His wife came forward. They said, we're going to do this the right way this time. And we closed September 14th.
That's awesome. So you didn't have to go to auction. So
we didn't go to auction.
That's awesome. I want to back up just a smidge.
Sure.
Here. Talk about that valuation. So obviously I don't want to talk numbers. I don't need to know the numbers, but how did you, everyone wonders, what's my business worth, right? And how did you and your team, your accountant, or whoever you worked with, go about evaluating that? Was it its assets, its goodwill, its revenue, its profit? What is that? Why did you guys get to your number?
So we actually ended up hiring a third-party valuator out of Boston. And what they did was they came in and simply looked at the value of the company, meaning what is the value of the company as far as it's operating today for one season. Obviously, that ended up being a little bit smaller number because we only operate for 4 months out of the year, 4 to 5 months. And then what they did was when they came back with their valuation, they said, you guys got to put a price on this equipment. We're not experienced in actual equipment assets. So what I did is I basically took 50% of the value of the equipment and threw it back at them. And then they generated a number that said, this is what we see this being worth. We believe that the value of the company is X amount. And then we believe less the assets. And then here's the assets, and then the goodwill. Yep. So that's kind of the three numbers that came together. That 50%
number is really interesting only because most business equipment, right, is once you buy it, it's really expensive to buy, right? Tents are really expensive to buy. For me, desks and computers are really expensive to buy, but the second you put them into use, they're worth nothing, right? I mean, you can go on Facebook Marketplace and get, a desk for a computer that, for pennies on the dollar what I paid for, right? And that's the same kind of idea. So everyone thinks, hey, I spent $50,000 on a tent probably, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't sell it for $50,000.
That's correct.
Right?
That's
so
correct.
it's hard to, it's hard when you're putting that together to say, hey, I really put a lot of money into this, but I might not get it back out.
That's right. And to be honest with you, Chris, the event rental industry is just a little bit different because it really solely is your equipment is your dollars. And you look at how many rentals have been on a product, how much you can resell it for. All those types of things. Then you got the IRS that comes in and does the depreciation schedules and all those types of things. So I think one of the biggest things for me when figuring out pricing and value on some of this stuff was really honesty, being honest with myself. What's worth $500 that used to be worth $20,000. There was a lot of those.
I believe it. And I think, you just mentioned being honest with the buyers, right? I think that's huge. You are selling your name to some extent, right? I mean, I think you don't want to get a year down the road and these guys to be, trashing you all over the internet or whatever, right? I think having a good relationship with the buyer is important. And I'm sure you still talk to them today, right? I'm sure
absolutely.
They still call you and say, hey, how'd you do this, right?
Yeah. So with that part, they actually put in their purchase and sale offer a 2-month guarantee that I would be there, answer any questions, help them along. That 2 months has now passed. We still go back and forth a little bit with different things. But, the good thing of the way this all played out was the buyer, he actually came into the business in July and worked for me. So he was able not only to learn a little bit about the processes, I'm sure he was taking inventory and deciding what he wanted to change, what he wanted to keep. But also building rapport with the team.
That's good. So there was a nice transition there.
It really was. It was. I couldn't ask for better.
We hear too many times that these things don't go well, and I think that's important to know and to keep in mind if you're going to sell your business that having a relationship with the buyer is important. Right?
It is.
It's going to make a difference in the long-term success of this as well. Especially, a lot of folks may hold paper. Right? You may say, "Hey, I'll finance this deal for you." Gosh, you don't want to be a piece of paper dictating your relationship, right? You want to be able to have a good relationship with these folks.
That's right. And again, this company has already been laid out and put forward to continue to grow. And I have no doubt that they're going to crush it. They're already crushing their numbers this year.
That's awesome.
But I will say, with all that you just said, Having now gone through this process, there is a few things that I would do differently, and I never would have known about them unless I had went through the process. And one of those is you need to be very black and white in the purchase and sale agreements of what you are willing to give and take.
Fair.
And I think sometimes in this process for me, fear of losing the sale drove some of those decisions that I made that I probably would not make again.
It's interesting. I think just talking about real estate, the last couple of years has been really crazy, and everyone hears these no contingencies, no this, no that. It's a straight, easy deal. And I think, especially when you're selling a business, it's not an easy deal. And there's a lot of due diligence that should go into that. I'm sure the buyers did a lot of due diligence, and you probably wanted to do a lot of due diligence on them, right? You want to make sure that this is actually going to go through. You want to make sure that this is actually going to be successful going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's just it. I think that you really have to look at the process of selling the business just like as if you're running the business, and look out for yourself.
Sure. It's a business transaction.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, and this is your livelihood. This is, what's going to set you up for this future and success. And, a lot of people may just want to get out of the business and not make any money or not lose any money. But I think in most cases, people have a sellable business. They want to sell that asset and make a return on the work that they've done over their career, right?
That's right.
That's important to remember. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with making a few bucks for all your hard work.
Right.
That's the American dream. So you got to September last year. So, what team did you have in place? Who did you have? I'm assuming you had an accountant, an attorney. You had some folks on your side that were helping you get through this. Who was, your ride or die through this process?
Yeah. So the two biggies were my attorney and his team, as well as the accountant, our accountant that we have had I've had him for 20 years actually. Yeah. And really being able to get their opinions on numbers and the fine print it was the most important. Luckily, I think I would say, in my opinion, from where I sit, this is not to negate what I went through. I would say the buyer definitely has a heavier burden on them. It was kind of this, not push and shove, but almost like one would move a little bit. They would move a little bit forward, then I would move a bit forward. I would go backwards, they would go backwards, and it's really a delicate dance.
Sure. And the attorneys are the ones making the money the whole way through. Remember that, right?
Yeah. Luckily, my attorney doesn't rob me broke, but they definitely. I don't have a lot of negative things I can say about this process. I think that from the horror stories that I've read, I think that the people that were involved, their attorneys, my attorneys, the accountants, really were just superb.
That's
and
great.
I don't think that's always the case.
No, I think, as in business, you have to build a team around you. And certainly when it comes time to sell your business, you have to have that team around you as well.
Right.
And certainly, we see that in a lot of transactions. I think if we see clients that are selling their businesses and it doesn't go well, it's usually because they're not represented well by a good attorney or a good accountant, or they don't have that team in place to help guide them. Because like you said, even up until I'm sure the day before the closing, there was changes, right? There
was changes last week.
Yeah, there you go. So even
last week,
and I can tell you, this morning I sold a business last year as well, and this morning I'm still we're still having conversations about the deal from last year, right? So it doesn't always end.
Tax allocation, I bet.
That's exactly what it is.
That's what we just finished last week.
So it's those are the types of things that do continue on forever, not forever, hopefully, but.
Something that I would probably come to a resolution before the papers were set.
We actually had to come to a resolution, and we talked about it and had this conversation, and then it got left out of the closing package. So it was actually the attorneys on all sides. There were 3 attorneys involved. Every single one of them missed it in the closing package. So we had to go back and just do a quick, hey, yep, does everyone still agree to this? Are we good with it? Let's just sign off on it really quickly. It wasn't even anything formal. We printed out the email. She signed it. I signed it. And we scanned it to the attorneys and the accountants and said, this is what we want to do. So it didn't cost us anymore. It wasn't an issue. But that definitely, the allocation of assets, right? So fixed assets, real estate, goodwill, what does that look like? Because in the tax world, all of those things are taxed differently, and you pay different taxes as a seller on that allocation, and the buyer potentially may pay taxes in the future on their cost basis when they sell based on what you decide today. So it does have forward-looking implications going down the road.
It's not something that I would partake in without the proper professionals.
Absolutely. That's something you need to have your accountant involved in that. And I think that becomes a negotiation. In our situation, it was pretty straightforward. But in some of these, when I purchased paper trails, right, that was a really long conversation about how we allocate the business, right? Because the assets of the business, it was almost 100% goodwill. Because like I said, the computers and desks are worthless, right?
Right.
All we have is our client base and our process and all that stuff. And how do we take that goodwill and break it up into different categories that benefit the seller, my aunt at the time, and me as the buyer, and make it good for them, make it good for you. I think that's a conversation and a negotiation that has to be had. And like you said, it should be happening during the sale. And I'll tell you, the realtors don't care about that. The brokers don't care about that, right? The brokers care about the bottom line, what their check is. That's what it comes down to. But I think your accountant is going to tell you, and your attorney is going to tell you, that's probably one of the most important things to be looking at.
I would agree. And in our situation, we ended up pulling that piece out of the closing package because it was potentially going to delay the closing. And God bless Josh and Jess and myself. We just said, no, we'll figure it out. We'll come to a resolution down the road. Let's just get this done because we had went on for almost 2 years at that point.
And I can tell you, when I bought paper trails now, fully, 5 years ago now, when I fully bought my aunt out, it was funny. We got to a point where the attorneys were just nitpicking the documents. Everything was back and forth every day. My attorney found something, her attorney found something, my attorney found something, her attorney. Finally, we had to say, enough. This is an amicable sale. We agree with 99% of everything that's in here. We've been doing this for 2 months. The whole process was over 6 months, right?
Right.
But we've been really looking at this paperwork for 2 months, and it was time to just do the deal. Like, let's move on. Let's sign the paperwork. And if there's something that needs to be fixed later on, again, it was an amicable sale. It was not, any angst there. So,
and to your point, I'll say to your listeners, I think that's really one of the biggest things that I learned through this process is that when it's time to walk away, it's time to walk away. And when it's time to be done and close the deal, it's time to close the deal. And you will know when those times are on, because I did both. I walked away from the same buyer the first time. And then at the end, when I was presented with, we need more time to talk to our accountant about this, to get the right accountant to look at this. Do you want to delay the closing or close without it? I said, let's close without it. Right. Like, it's time.
So you get to the closing table, right? Everything gets signed. There's probably a mountain of paperwork, right?
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah.
Actually, as a seller, there's a lot less to sign.
There is a lot less to sign as a seller.
The buyer usually shows up early to sign all the bank stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when you got to the end of that day, you walked out of the lawyer's office. I'm sure the buyers were popping a bottle of champagne. You were popping a bottle of champagne. But then what was that emotion? What did you feel like when you were leaving? Where did you have a plan on what you were going to do after this?
So, this has been a funny thing, right? Like, I actually, my girlfriend had told me several times, Nick, you're probably going to grieve the loss of this business. And I think that's a natural process in something like this, right? I mean, I grew this thing out of my garage with $2,000 to doing almost $600,000 a year in sales in 9 years. And that's in 4 months. And surviving COVID. I mean, that alone is like it's like 4 chapters. What I will say is, it's a little bit surreal when I left there, knowing that I am not going back to anything that has. And I think what makes it a little bit more surreal is that they kept the name because it does have such a good reputation in the market. We're one of the biggest event rental companies in the state of Maine, and we're the only event rental company that does 50% tented events, 50% inflatable events. Everybody else is either tents or inflatables. Yep. That diversified category, by the way, really helped us through COVID, big time. It takes about 3 weeks to really wrap your head around, like, I don't own this place anymore. And after you go through about 4 of those Kenny Bunk roadside trash cans of recycled paper from being shredded, you start to really realize I'm really done with this business. So that part has been, I miss my guys, all the guys that work for me are like sons. But I was ready to move on, Chris. There was a lot of relief to that process.
Sure. Your mental health is important anyway. So
Correct.
I think that's amazing to, you say rip the Band-Aid off, but it was a very slow tear, I'm sure.
It was.
I think that's important to be to recognize is you said the grieving thing. I think it is a grief process to some extent. I think there's the stages of that, right? And I think the last one was the relief, and you moved on, right? So
yeah, and I always wanted to get back to what I was really doing before I moved to Maine, which is designing and building theme parks, water parks all over the world. This time, I'm actually able to build a couple of my own personal attractions in different municipalities between here and New York. So that's kind of been my focus now, a little bit of design, a little bit of project management.
Nice.
And it's what I've always loved to do my whole life. I had a career in it before I moved here for 15 years. And so this was always kind of a goal to get back there. It just came a little quicker than I thought it would.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that's a really good, I think we've had a lot of really good conversations about that process. Are there any takeaways you want people, hey, if you're thinking about selling your business, you need to do this or think about this?
I think the very first thing, I just had this conversation with someone that called me over in New York a couple of weeks ago about potentially selling their business. And they are very much in a mental strain with it. And the very first thing that I told them was over the next 6 months, since they know that they're not doing anything right yet, is to basically take inventory. And what I mean by inventory isn't just a hard inventory of your assets, but of every single thing that you work with and do in your daily business, whether it's a supplier that you use once every 2 years. Write these things down in a notebook and get as much information on paper as possible the minute you start thinking about potentially selling your business, even if you don't end up selling your business.
Because that's an asset, right? That's, the process, the knowledge, the vendors, that's an asset.
It really is. And you're going to save yourself a lot of time, and you're not going to forget as much when it comes time to actually put that number on the business. So prepping yourself way ahead of actually turning the page and saying, okay, we're going to try to sell this thing, getting as much information down as possible. You'd be surprised how much information we don't have down in black and white.
I believe. Even in our business, where I think we're pretty organized, but there's things we just do every day, right?
Correct.
You don't think about it, you just do it. And I think especially if you're going to sell your business, having that process written down is really important. So.
That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway would be good to yourself, right? There's certain things that you have personally in your business that you value that most of the other people or the people in the world don't value. Don't let go of that, right? Make sure that you uphold some of those values, traditions, personal things that make you excited in the business through that whole process. Because remember, after all, this is most likely your baby that you're going to have an emotional connection to for the rest of your life. I would love nothing more than to go back in 10 years and see this company being sold for $2-3 million.
That'd be awesome.
Just to know that I started that. That's really, those are the two biggest things, right? And I don't really know.
Any regrets?
I don't have any regrets.
That's good.
I don't have any regrets. We had a couple tough lawsuits right before COVID that we went through. And I think just having gone through that, you find kind of a new level of peace as you make decisions for your business.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of regrets.
That's good.
With my business or selling my business, the process.
Awesome. That's great.
So
usually this part we say, hey, if people want to get in touch with you, do you have a way that people can get in touch with you? Do you care? I would say, you're retired, leave me alone.
Yeah, no, I'm not retired for sure. But
so we usually say, hey, do you have an Instagram or anything like that you want people to reach out to?
So you can check us out. We still have the food truck, Char
that's right.
Rigs Snow and Dough Adventure Company. That's at Char Rigs. Actually, that's at Snow and Dough on Instagram. People can also email me directly, nick@sharppencilcreative.com.
Still got the email.
Yep. So I've been Sharp Pencil Creative since I graduated.
Well, that's the design
from
piece,
college, right? So that's the design piece. The entertainment, Sharp Pencil Creative Entertainment LLC is now being gone. But yes, anybody can get a hold of me, nick@sharppencilcreative.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really great conversation today. Just a reminder, everyone, be sure to like, follow, subscribe, Apple Podcasts on Spotify, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. We're everywhere. If you have questions for any of us or our guests, feel free to email us at podcast@papertrails.com. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of A Small Business, Big World. This podcast is a production of Paper Trails. We are a payroll and HR company based in Kennebunk, Maine, and we serve small and mid-sized businesses across New England and the country. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to follow us at Paper Trails Payroll across all social media platforms and check us out at papertrails.com for more information. As a reminder, the views, opinions, and thoughts expressed are the hosts and guests alone. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered legal or financial advice. By inviting this guest to our podcast, Paper Trails does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific individual, organization, product, or service.